That's great. So thank you for having me. Thank you very much, Kim, for inviting me to come and share. So it's stress and stress management. I mean, we're here to talk about the combination of stress and how that interplays with autoimmune disease. But really, at the end of the day, stress has an impact on everything. And it just so happens that autoimmune disease and immune dysfunction are conditions in which stress is extremely precarious, and we have to be very conscientious of stress and how stress interacts with our biology. And so I was advised that my title of Stress and Autoimmune Disease was too boring by my mom, who's a psychologist, and I have a great deal of respect for her. She says to me, "Lindsay, I won't come to that lecture. It's too boring. You need to change it." So I called it Lions, Tigers, and Bears. Oh my. Stress, autoimmune disease, and the importance of healthy stress management. And so I don't have my lovely PowerPoint projector here, but we're gonna have that conversation. The one thing that I am gonna do, and turn my little computer here around, and it's nice, we've got a nice tight little group here, so it will still work, is show you a video, because I think it really sets the tone. So can everyone see my little screen? Kind of. And it's going to be loud enough, hopefully, that everyone can hear. So.
About is somebody is very intent on eating you, or you are very intent on eating somebody.
So I guess I should preface that with, what is this? So this is a video by a gentleman who studies stress response in people and in animals, and so I've kind of cut in halfway through his video because the whole beginning part is very interesting but less relevant to us. And so it's titled "Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers." So, and this is our lovely scientist.
Because what stress is about is somebody is very intent on eating you, or you are very intent on eating somebody, and there's an immediate crisis going on.
When you run for your life, basics are all that matter. Lungs work overtime to pump mammoth quantities of oxygen into the bloodstream. The heart races to pump that oxygen throughout the body, so muscles respond instantly.
You need your blood pressure up to deliver that energy. You need to turn off anything that's not essential. Growth, reproduction, you're running for your life. This is no time to ovulate, tissue repair, all that sort of thing. Do it later if there is a later.
When the zebra escapes, its stress response shuts down. But human beings can't seem to find their off switch.
We turn on the exact same stress response for purely psychological states, thinking of.
And that's all that we need of that. So that sets the tone for what we're going to talk about today. And ultimately that's why zebras don't get ulcers. So zebras and antelope and deer and pretty much every other mammal out there, when they're through with their acute stress state, right, they shake it off. And it's fascinating to watch, and we can see it in our kids when they're really little. We can see it in our animals, if we've got animals in our lives. They have their moment, they get over their moment, and they have a very physical, typically, release of all of that tension. And we've lost that. We've lost the ability to shake it off. So in the long term, that has consequences. So all these lions and tigers and bears, all of these things that our adrenal glands can't differentiate between taxes and partner stress and financial stress and, oh man, some guy just cut me off and that's really frustrating because this and this and this and this is also going on. Our adrenal glands don't get the difference. It's all full bore, it's all 100%, and the physiological effects of all of that are coming into not just those stress hormones that we know about, like adrenaline, but also changing the release of blood sugars. It blocks our body's ability to break down fat and increases the laying down of new fat, especially over our middle. That's why we get what's called that central adiposity that we love so much. And so that's what cortisol does. It also has a really precarious effect on the cells of the immune system themselves. So they've done many, many studies at this point showing that the function of our T lymphocytes and our natural killer cells, which are very important for fighting off infections and fighting cancer, and that get overstimulated in autoimmune conditions, these things get poorly functioning. They don't function optimally with a high cortisol state. And cortisol is that stress hormone that we release in those long-term stressful situations. So it's kind of a perfect storm. When you're thinking about the increased blood sugars, that suppresses the immune system all on its own because sugar is very immune dysregulating. But when you factor sugar in with increased fat, now we have a lot of inflammation. And so that's that perfect storm for autoimmune dysfunction and autoimmune dysregulation. Because autoimmune disease is not all or nothing. Autoimmune disease is a spectrum, right? You have a set of tissues that your body has started to attack, and those antibodies that are being made inappropriately, you will always, once you have a diagnosis or once you have started to make those antibodies, you'll always unfortunately have the capacity to make them. So we don't talk about autoimmune disease in terms of cure, we talk about it in terms of remission. So you can have somebody's immune system shift so that they're no longer making large quantities of antibody, but we have to keep stress management as a really important part of our lifestyle, because a shift in those immune parameters and a shift of those immune cells can unfortunately re-trigger those autoantibodies to being made. And that's why it's a lifelong thing. Good stress management is not something that we just do today and forget about tomorrow. It's a practice that we work on in ourselves continuously. So how do the interplay of stress factor into immune function? Acute stress, so an exam that you have to take or a natural disaster that you have to run away from, those can actually, in the long run, increase immune function. Your body has to get away from that thing, but it's in this heightened state. And so if it's short term, your immune system can kick up and sort of pick up the slack for you. Where it's dangerous is when those states continue on and on and on, and we've moved from the acute into the chronic. There was a really, really good study. I'm a giant science nerd, and so you're very lucky that we don't have the projector, because what you're missing is my reams and reams and reams of abstracts and study things that I put up on the wall here that my mom tells me is too boring to do a lecture on, so it's good. She's happy. She gets her way. I am de facto not putting up all of my studies, but there was this really great meta-analysis, and so in the world of science and studies, we really like these double-blind studies, which are important, but they really do miss a lot of things. But I'm a big fan of reviews and meta-analysis, because that's what lets us look back on everything that's being done, and we can take little studies and put them all together. And so there was a great meta-analysis done right here in BC, actually. We've got a UBC connection on the psychological stress and the human immune system. And so that's a really, really great review. But they actually show in there that there's evidence that improving coping skills improves stress parameter, immune parameters. And so having a stressful life does not force you to be in a bad immune state forever. We can shift that immune functioning by shifting our ability to cope with the stress. And so again, that ties into what I want to talk to you about in terms of how to manage that. I mentioned briefly there, but I want to reiterate, it's about balance. And so cortisol, if we think of that as being the central stress hormone, too high is no good. That's when we get suppressed immune function. That's when everything stops and our body is geared up into that fight or flight response, right? That's where we're running for our lives, but we're doing it daily. So that's no good for the immune system and for autoimmune. But similarly, when those adrenal glands that make cortisol get burnt out, and we've then gone from high cortisol down through now into flatlined cortisol, so low cortisol, that's also bad for us, because cortisol is important for tissue repair, it's important for the activation of the immune system. It's really quite key to so many of the rhythms of what's called our hypothalamic pituitary axis, HPA axis. It's a little less of a mouthful. So it's really, when we think about it, it can get overwhelming, because it's like, all right, so too much is not good and not enough is not good, so how do we find that balance? And ultimately, the important thing is that our body does it just fine if we just get out of its way. So one of the big things, and I recall learning this in school, I think it was Hippocrates, and don't quote me on that, but I think it was Hippocrates that said it's the physician's job to occupy the patient while the body heals itself. And at the end of the day, a lot of the time, we just have to get out of our own way. So we need to do that in a mindful and conscientious manner, but we need to get out of our own way. We create a lot of our dysfunction, right? So we need to stop and listen to our body a little bit. I have so many nice pictures on here, in with all of the studies and things like that. So anyhow, so that kind of brings us to sort of the meat and potatoes, if I'm to use my grandfather's analogy, of what we're here to talk about, which is how can we do this? How can we manage those stressful situations? How can we help our bodies to adapt so that our stress is manageable and we can cope with it? Because we're all going to have stress, right? Life doesn't stop. Children don't stop. Friends and partners and businesses don't stop. So it's about management. So some of the things that I want to show you sort of some studies about and just talk about and have a conversation, because I'd love to hear what you have to say as well, is the importance of yoga and meditation, and just having some mindfulness and bringing mindfulness to our breath, and what a powerful impact that can have. Massage, or just touch. I think when a lot of people talk about massage, of course, they talk about the fantastic, amazing work that Kim and Kim are doing here all the time, and that's hugely important for lots of things. But even just touch, right? Getting a hug, petting a dog, it doesn't matter, but we're mammals and we need touch. It's really, really important to us. Good sleep habits and the importance of melatonin for regulating our immune system and regulating our cellular repair cycles. Forest bathing, which is interesting, and we'll talk about that. And then, because I'm a naturopath and I couldn't leave it out, we have to talk a little bit about mushrooms and probiotics. So, yoga, again, study after study after study these days. I think it must be like UBC's favorite grad school topic, I think. But every study that they do on yoga and chronic pain, immune dysfunction, so everything from HIV/AIDS through to multiple sclerosis, there's fantastic studies. pretty much every condition they've now checked with yoga, it helps restore balance, it helps lower cortisol levels, it lowers the subjective measurements of stress and distress, which is important, right? If we feel stressed, regardless of the physical impact, our emotional impact is going to change our biology. The notion that there's a separation between mind and body is completely false. It just doesn't happen that way. It's convenient for textbooks and for different disciplines of medicine, but it's not true. Everything that happens in our mind has a profound impact on our biology and how our biology works. Trust me, the drug companies know all about this, right? I'm sure you've heard the commercials on TV about how depression hurts. It's physically painful to have depression. Well, that's true. And it's not just a saying. The pain receptors in our body are all all of our nerves in our body are based on essentially a simple electrical circuit. So we have a threshold and we have a level at which an impulse must be generated in order for the nerve to be triggered. And so in simple electrical systems, this is the impulse before the trigger. And so in pain, that amount has to be impulsed in order for the receptor to go off and for you to have the sensation of pain. Depression actually reduces that threshold. So it takes considerably less stimulus for the receptor or for the nerve to be fired. And so the perception of pain is always higher with depression. And I would say the same with high cortisol and high stress, because really they're two sides of the same coin. So there have been studies, for example, on cortisol and cortisol deficiency increasing the perception of pain. And that's really, really relevant in certain conditions like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, where we know these individuals have very, very high pain and very low cortisol and low stress adaptation ability, right? It's a hallmark of those conditions that stressors become overwhelming very quickly. And so it's really, really important to help with stress management, both biochemically and psychology. And that's across the board with autoimmune, of which, by the way, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue have now been classed as autoimmune. So yoga, there's systematic reviews, beautifully, beautifully done reviews on what a big impact yoga can have on that. And then another great article written on chronic physical illnesses, so any chronic physical illness, and how psychosocial approaches, so mindfulness, yoga, counseling, anything where we're supporting a person's emotional well-being has such a profound impact on the physical illness itself. So really good studies in that. A recent article on natural killer cell function and mindfulness, so that was fantastic. See, you get to miss all these just big, like, wordy things. We get to just have chat. Massage. Massage is, as I say, very multifactorial. So massage has benefits on improving circulation and improving lymphatic movement, and these obviously have big immune benefits. But there's also just that very mammalian human need for touch. And I can tell you that in my own practice, it's really important for me to hold someone's arm, and I think checking blood pressure, as much as it's a very empirical thing, it gives me a really good excuse to get up close and touch somebody, even if I'm just putting my hand on their back while I'm checking their blood pressure. And I know in my own practice that when I'm doing this all the time on a regular basis, I'll have someone come in and they're really distressed and they're really worked up. And we can get to slow things down with talking, but it's not until I kind of get my hands on them that, okay, things diffuse a little. And then it's a really profound experience, because whether they realize it or not, it's kind of like when you've got a live wire and now you've put the ground on and it just dissipates, right? It's very fast and it's very noticeable, and we all do it and we all have it. And so, I mean, that's something that all of us can do for our friends and family on a daily basis, and for ourselves, right? That physical touch gives us the release as well as giving that other person the release. But certainly massage itself and therapeutic massage has all those other lovely benefits to the immune system and to the reduction of the perception of pain, again, and to the improvement of immune function. Healthy sleep. How many of you get good, like you fall asleep the moment your head hits the pillow and you wake up 5 minutes before your alarm, ready for the day kind of sleep? Any? There's any of you that get that? Maybe? You don't have children, do you?
He can hit the pillow and sleep, but I don't know that he sleeps well.
I wake up before my alarm, but I feel terrible when I wake up.
But you're not happy about it. Okay, so the caveat, of course, is that you wake up feeling good and ready for the day. And so that's optimal. When our body is functioning well, that's what happens. We lay down and we fall asleep. And we stay in this beautiful, restful, rejuvenating sleep for as long as we need to, which is different for each person. Some people it's 6 hours, some people it's 9 hours. We all fall within that sort of spectrum. But when you wake up without needing assistance from an alarm, and you're ready to start the day, and you don't have to drag yourself out of bed, and we don't need a cup of coffee. We just wake up and we're ready. And hardly anybody does that anymore. There's so many things going on. But I'm hopeful always that we can move more and more and more toward that. So a big player in having that really nice rhythm is not just cortisol, which regulates the daytime rhythms, but also melatonin, which regulates our nighttime rhythms. So cortisol and melatonin are like the sun and the moon, right? If the sun is up, the moon is down. If the moon is up, the sun is down. And it's Canada and we're north and we don't necessarily always get that, but we're supposed to have that, right? And so melatonin is something that is an often overlooked support for people. And when you look at all the studies that have been done on melatonin and autoimmune disease, melatonin is a very, very useful regulator, not only of tissue healing, but of immune function. Because our immune system is supposed to work full bore wonderfully while we're sleeping, right? So everyone's heard of fight, flight, freeze, right? That's sympathetic nervous system. What everyone forgets about is the other side of that is rest, digest, and repair. That's the other half of the autonomic nervous system. And really that's what's going on with that stress and immune dysregulation. When we're stuck in fight, flight, freeze, we can't get into rest, digest, and repair. So restorative sleep and melatonin. Melatonin in a healthy individual is used to help with re-regulating circadian rhythms after you've gone on a big trip somewhere far away, right? Gets your internal clock restarted. But in an individual with autoimmune or neurodegenerative, which is typically autoimmune, or cancer, so some of those big whopper immune dysfunction conditions, melatonin is much, much more than just sleep. It is that immune modulator and that immune regulator. It's also very, very neuroprotective. So it's a very active antioxidant in our brain, for example, and one of the very few antioxidants that works in our brain. And so melatonin is very safe. It's something that I dose on a daily basis for those patients who need that extra support. And it's one of the few hormones in our body that doesn't have an off switch. So taking melatonin will never suppress your own body's production of melatonin. There's no negative feedback loop like there is with other hormones. Our body makes melatonin in response to the dark, and it stops making melatonin in response to light. And so, again, when we're talking about good restorative sleep, it becomes extremely important that we're not accidentally suppressing our good, healthy, normal melatonin production. That means no blue light. What is made with blue light? All of our electronic devices, all of them. So iPads and tablets and phones and TVs and computers are all blue light. And it will shut down your melatonin production. So I have a rule about no electronics 30 minutes before bed. I don't care if you read on a piece of paper or if you have one of those e-reader things that's not a blue light, it's like a paper light. If you have a small lamp that's behind you, not in front of you, and you're using that to read paper, that's okay. Or, absolutely the optimal thing to do before bed is that mindfulness meditation or the mindfulness practice that it would be lovely if we all had. And so, the simplest form of that, and something that I suggest frequently, especially for people who are just beginning. Now, because this group has come together as at the invitation of this wonderful massage and yoga studio, I know that you all probably have a pretty healthy respect and appreciation for mindfulness and meditation and yoga, but I have lots of patients who look at me like I'm a crazy person when I talk about how it would be beneficial to have some quiet time. And so for those people, I like to talk a little more empirically, because then they don't think I'm about to do a rain dance around them or something like that. And I talk about something called progressive muscle relaxation, because it's really easy to understand squeezing muscle groups and letting them go. But ultimately, progressive muscle relaxation is just a sneaky way of getting somebody to be willing to do mindfulness, because it just has them concentrating on certain muscle groups. Ultimately, mindfulness is what's going to help people move forward. And I'm not too fussed about what they're being mindful about, right? This is where prayer of any type is a good thing, because we're being focused and mindful, and it helps people to relate to something that's larger than them, which is also important. So that's restfulness, rejuvenation, and sleep. So I hope all of you go home tonight and take a moment to find your peace, take some big breaths, and whatever source of mindfulness resonates well with you, to have a bit of a mindfulness practice before you go to sleep, even if it's only a couple of minutes. It does make a difference to the quality of your sleep. And please, no night lights. And in your children's rooms or your grandchildren's rooms, no night lights. You're suppressing melatonin production. And if you wake up, don't turn on TVs, don't turn on lights. If you wake up in the middle of the night, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, right? Deep breathing. You can have a recording of a guided meditation next to your bed, as long as it doesn't light up bright for you to have to turn it on. Good old-fashioned CD player where you push the button. I have a review on autoimmune disease and sleep for anyone who cares about the science. It's there. Now, forest bathing. Okay, this was cool, I have to say. So again, my practice over at Integrated Health Clinic is very, very, I see people with a lot of very, very not nice illnesses. So my focus is cancer and chronic disease, specifically autoimmune diseases and chronic infectious diseases. And so I get people sort of from all sides of the spectrum. I get those individuals who come and they want to be as natural as possible, and they want to come at this body, mind, and soul. And then I get those individuals who've been told they need to come see me by their oncologist because they're doing very, very poorly through chemo and radiation. And, oh, well, you know, this humming a naturopath is going to make them eat grass or something like that. So I have to kind of float in this world of both sides of the spectrum. So forest bathing, seeing a clinical trial study done on forest bathing was kind of cool for me, because I get to then juggle both and say, look, there is research to support being in a forest. So what forest bathing is just spending time in a forest. That's it. But it was really cool because it showed in this study that it increases natural killer cell activity, the number of natural killer cells, and intracellular anti-cancer proteins in the lymphocytes. And so why is that relevant to an autoimmune discussion? Because cancer and autoimmune disease are either end of a teeter-totter. And so it's about balancing that teeter-totter. And if we have a wild swing in one direction, we can get a wild swing in the other direction. And we have seen that those individuals who have autoimmune disease, unfortunately, are at higher risk of cancer because of the immune dysfunction. So it's about balance. So what happened with this? They took 12 healthy subjects and they put them in 2 separate groups. And they took 6 of them, so a very small number, but it was still done. 6 of them, sent them into a forest for 3 days. And they had to go on hikes and they had to do specific activities because they matched the activities with the other 6 people who they sent to a city on vacation. So both of these groups were on vacation. They were both away from their work, they were away from their stressors, but there was the city vacation with a certain amount of walking and steps matched to the forest vacation with a certain amount of walking and steps. And they got the same amount of sleep, they got the same diets, they got the same everything except the physical environment that they were in. And what they've discovered, like I said, is all of those increases in immune parameters. And when they tried to figure out what the difference was, it was pinene and limonene. These are the essential oils naturally released by trees. So trees and that pine scent that they try to replicate all the time with those silly little car air fresheners actually has immune enhancing activity. So if you ever needed a reason to get out of the city and go for a walk on Bray Island or anywhere else around here with lots of trees, and we're lucky, I don't know if you're living in the area, but if you live in the area, we got trees everywhere, which is wonderful. But every time you smell that piney, foresty scent, you are breathing in immune enhancing wonderful essential oils, because the city guys didn't get any of that. They actually found that the cortisol levels of the city guys went up even though they were on vacation, but they were in New York. So I don't know, maybe they were trying to cross the street too many times or something, and crazy cabbies trying to run them over. But it was fascinating to me, and it was fascinating because, as I say, they tried to match these 2 groups, and they took very specific blood and urine samples of these 2 groups before, during, and after these experiences, and found, as I said, very statistically significant differences in the natural killer cell activity, the number of natural killer cells, and a bunch of other immune enhancing little guys. And it also found a reduced concentration of adrenaline in their urine.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, would diffusing essential oils work the same way or no?
It would be similar in some circumstances. So pinene and pinol, of course, were one of the thousands of essential oils.
Yeah.
But it certainly isn't going to hurt you.
Right.
I think that essential oils certainly have they've renewed their vigor recently, largely to the efforts of some clever marketing individuals. My caution always with essential oils is making sure that you're getting a pure source, right? Because just because something smells a certain way doesn't mean it is that oil. And there are all sorts of very clever scientists out there that can mimic the sense of things without having the actual physical chemical makeup. And so in my ideal world, all essential oils vials will come with a spectroscopy report that shows you that it's got the spikes where there's supposed to be spikes. But that's the big nerd in me. My undergraduate degree is in chemistry, so I have like visions of spectroscopy reports. Okay, so I love this study because it shows that there is physically and literally a healing power in nature. That's just really cool. Let's jump into mushrooms. So when it comes to autoimmune, we have to be a little bit careful. We have to skate across some thin ice here, because you can't, when you have an autoimmune disease, indiscriminately stimulate the immune system. That can be dangerous. The immune system is attacking that person's body, and we can't stimulate for fear of stimulating an attack. So it's really important when you're using nutrients for a person with autoimmune to modulate. I'm going to take a drink of tea. Thank you. Okay, to modulate the immune system. So not too high, not too low, we want to balance it. The notion of an amphoteric activity or a modulating activity in medicine is very contentious, because drugs can't do that, right? Drugs have one action. If you think about the most powerful immune suppressant that we've got, that's prednisone and dexamethasone. These are mega steroids, steroids on steroids that stop immune function. There are no drugs that sort of assess where your body is at and do fine-tuning in terms of increasing here and decreasing there. But herbs are made up of thousands of chemicals. It's not just one. And so herbs have this ability. They have well-documented amphoteric activity, which means that it can increase where it's needed to increase and decrease where it's needed to decrease. And mushrooms do this beautifully. And fortunately, all mushrooms have medicinal activity, which means even those silly button mushrooms you get at the grocery store are medicinal. They're not perhaps as immune modulating as the shiitakes and the maitakes and the reishis and things like that, but they do have immune activity. And so I encourage people to eat mushrooms frequently. So mushrooms are good because they help shift the immune system out of that pro-inflammatory, self-injuring kind of autoimmune state and shift it back into healthy immune function, where it's attacking viruses and attacking bacteria and helping your body to stay healthy. So that's really lovely. And I have, again, this really gobbledygook diagram that shows beautifully how mushrooms and the beta-glucans in mushrooms increase natural killer cell activity and decrease interleukin-6 and decrease interleukin-1, and those are both bad guys. And so ultimately there's a ton of research there, and they're very safe. And so I like to tailor different mushrooms to different people. A good example of that is chaga mushrooms. And chaga is actually grown in BC, so you can wildcraft chaga if you've ever gone up north, or even in central BC, if there's any trees left that are growing chaga. But chaga is not just a very powerful immune modulator, but it's very good for stress and stress adaptation. And so I have patients, for example, that will have a chaga tea, and it's very calming for them. So they do that before bed every night. Other mushrooms like cordyceps, for example, has antimicrobial activity. So if I have a patient who has an infection of any kind, I use cordyceps. Reishi has some really good modulating activity, and it's also very restorative for people's energy. I'd say the same with things like Corialis. So there's lots of different kinds of mushrooms, and I use them for slightly different reasons. Lion's mane is beautiful for brain function, so for people who have a lot of brain fog or dementia. So again, I really love how herbal medicine it can be tailored specifically, not just to a condition like autoimmune, but you can pick and choose based on what else is going on in the person's life. Because it's incredibly, incredibly important that you don't treat the disease that the person has, but you treat the person who has the disease, right? That's a huge distinction to make. So last little shout out to our guts. Our guts are the seat of our immune system. So we have something called the gut-associated lymphatic tissue, the GALT. And this gut-associated lymphatic tissue is where our immune system lives. And our bugs are a huge contributor to the function of this immune system. So I want you to think about something for a minute. I was shown a video in grade 12, and if I was even a touch more OCD than I already am, and hadn't been in a really good place in my life, this may have triggered me to become a compulsive hand washer, because this video was all about what lives on us and in us. And then in my schooling I learned, and this was kind of cool but a little frightening, that there are 3 trillion bacteria and microbes that live in us and on us, which means that by number, we are more organism than human, because there are only billions of human cells and there are trillions of bugs. So there is a huge impact when we decimate those bugs. And fascinating, still a theory, but fascinating, is that the purpose of our appendix has been proposed to be a repository for bacteria, so that when we do have a wipeout of our good bugs, whether it's outside from antibiotics or internal from something like food poisoning, where we get a big purge of all of our everything, that our appendix was there as that repository to repopulate. And so it's interesting, all the implications that we have now with this massive generation of people who have no appendices, because they were just sort of removed. But good bugs, probiotics, and a healthy gut flora is actually really, really, really key to proper immune function. And it's really cool that literally every single study that's been done on the microflora in the last 5 years is like, oh, guess what? Good bugs affect this. Oh, and guess what? Good bugs affect cancer incidence and autoimmune disease and childhood autism and the propensity for kids to get sick or asthma or eczema, or every single study that they run shows that your bacteria have an influence, every single one. And so we are just barely scratching the surface of what the importance of those good bugs and that normal flora is and what can that become. So that means more than just taking probiotics, right? When you take probiotics, some of the best probiotics out there are only 10 to maybe, if you're lucky, 20 different strains. We have hundreds and thousands of strains. We used to eat dirt, and we don't anymore. We live in a very, very clean environment. And what they've seen is that there is an inverse relationship between the cleanliness of a house and the frequency of asthma and eczema in children. So that's completely counter to what I grew up with, right? My mom, cleanliness is next to godliness, and it has to be beautiful. We need to eat dirt. And and we need to play in dirt, and we need to be surrounded by other dirty people, right? It's a strange thing, but we can kind of get around that in our OCD society by eating fermented food, right? Living foods provide a really, really great source of good bugs. So there's been a big kombucha fad. I love it. Do it. It looks like snot, but it doesn't taste like it, so you're okay. Getting back to the old ways with the sauerkraut and the pickles, and every single solitary culture has a fermented food. Kimchi and miso, all of us have a fermented food. We just need to eat them again. And we need to eat them in their raw form. It doesn't help to make that big, beautiful batch of kombucha and then pasteurize it, because we've killed it all, right? We've got to eat the good stuff. So just that's that little, and remember that those good bugs have to eat too, and they eat fiber. So fiber is a pretty important part of our diet, because when we eat fiber, the bugs eat. And we don't want to give it the other side, which is sugar. We want to give them fiber. That's the end of my little spiel. So thank you for having me, and I welcome questions and discussion.
One of the things that I often, people who have fibromyalgia will be treated with antidepressants. But from their family doctor will often prescribe.
Absolutely.
And so in your experience, is that an effective approach, do you think? And I understand your opinion, maybe you could talk a little bit about
Absolutely. So I come from things at a bit of what I think is a bit of a unique perspective from the world of naturopathic medicine, because I'm very much an integrative doctor. And I think that a huge part of me being an integrative doctor is because of the nature of the patients that I see. So I feel like I truly and to my core believe that it's dangerous for my patients if any healthcare professional practices from a place of dogmatic refusal to accept other practices. And I mean that I think it's hazardous for a naturopath to say that there is no benefit in conventional medicine. And I think it's hazardous for a conventional doctor to say that there's no benefit to naturopathic medicine. Just as I think it's hazardous for a chiropractor to say that chiropractics is the be-all and end-all, right? At the end of the day, there is value in all of the different disciplines of medicine, and it's about using the most appropriate tools at any given time to support that person. And so, do antidepressants help people with fibromyalgia? Maybe. There is a time and a place, and I think that antidepressants can be a useful tool to break a cycle, but I don't think that they need to be what's depended on, because antidepressants don't treat fibromyalgia. Antidepressants provide a band-aid to support a person, to give them enough energy, really, to give them a bit of a break from that constant barrage of depression and anxiety, so that they can work on the deficiencies that are actually contributing to the fibromyalgia, or the infection that's contributing to the fibromyalgia, or any number of autoimmune conditions that could be contributing to fibromyalgia. So I guess the short answer is maybe. But the long answer is that it's really about that person and where that person is at. And so I don't dismiss antidepressants out of hand. I've seen many incidences where those antidepressants saved somebody's life. It's about using the right tool at the right time, at the right dose for the right patient.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is the best way to diagnose an autoimmune condition?
Oh my. How do we solve world hunger? So autoimmune has, it has a hallmark of having antibodies that are being made against a specific tissue. So the best way to diagnose an autoimmune disease is to find and quantify those antibodies, because that tells us, is it there, how bad is it, and what tissues is it against? And then we can form an informed sort of attack plan. And then it also tells me what to look for, right? So what are some early warning signs that that tissue's being injured? Whereas if I don't know what tissue's being injured, I don't know what to look for. So, I rely heavily on collaboration with rheumatologists, and that doesn't mean that they've always got it right. But it means that they have some good tools at their disposal, and when they're open and willing to do the searching, often we can work together to figure out what's going on and why. Ultimately, I think one of the things that people forget about all the time is that autoimmune is always triggered by something. There's always a trigger, and that trigger can be a physical or emotional trauma, and it can be an infectious trauma. But there is always a trauma. There's always a trigger. And so usually when I talk to my patients, they can kind of think back, oh yeah, you know what, I had that really bad bout of mono and I was never better since then. Or yeah, I was in that car accident and nothing got better after that. Or my dad died and nothing was the same. So there's almost always something that they can link it back to.
So depending on the person's symptoms would depend on what tests you would run to figure out whether it would be an autoimmune condition or not?
That's right, yeah. So you got to chase the symptoms a little bit with that. At the end of the day, our body is our biggest resource, and we have to learn how to interpret what our body's telling us. I kind of feel like that's my whole job, is just interpreting what the body's trying to say. So thankfully, usually, there are very specific tissues with autoimmune, but there is this collection of disorders called mixed connective tissue disease. And mixed connective tissue disease is the IBS of the autoimmune world. So it's just, there's something wrong. There are generalized anti-nuclear antibodies present, but we can't identify what tissue's being damaged. Yeah. I wish I had more, sorry. Yep.
With using melatonin to kind of get your flow of sleeping, what would be, I guess, how much and like how often should you take it to kind of start that process for you?
Okay, so in cancer, for example, I always use doses between 10 and 20 milligrams. In neurodegenerative conditions, so autoimmune diseases of the neurons like MS, and conditions like Parkinson's or Huntington's or ALS, I will use that same 10 to 20 milligram dosage. For generalized immune support, even using dosages of 3 milligrams is really useful, because physiologically in a healthy individual, we're putting out just under 1 milligram every night. So 3 milligram dosage is still actually super physiological, and people don't get groggy with it. Although I have to say, I have yet to have somebody who really needs those high doses that has side effects from those high doses. For some reason, they just don't. They don't get groggy. They don't get vivid dreams.
That's what I've heard of, that people get vivid dreams. So that's the part that scared me. I was like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, and that's I've
So
seen
if you
that.
have a little bit, it should help.
Oh yes, yeah. No, even those 3 milligram dosages and a 1 milligram dosage, really. I mean, for those individuals that are just needing support with sleep, and don't have a chronic inflammatory condition or a chronic immune dysfunction, I never suggest higher than 3 milligrams, and I tell most of them that one is sufficient. It is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that you can buy 10 milligram melatonin at Costco, because it's a hazard, right? It is a hormone, and so if you take it at the wrong time of day, you can mess up your entire circadian rhythm, especially at those dosages. So always before bed, by the way, melatonin should be dosed when it is naturally high, which is before bed.
And how long before bed?
Anywhere from immediately to, if you've got a capsule, you could take it 30 minutes beforehand, but usually it takes 15 minutes and it kicks in. Yeah. And the sublinguals are like immediate.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments?
Well, I'm interested in the mushrooms.
Yes.
But some of those mushrooms that you mentioned, of course, I've never heard of.
Yes.
So, where do you get, how would the average person know what mushrooms would be good? Or what
The
would
average
be good?
person wouldn't. But if you talk to a herbalist,
Okay.
or if you see a naturopath, or if you see somebody who is knowledgeable about herbs, they can tailor the right sort of mushroom to you. If you're interested in learning about mushrooms, there are all sorts of books. One of the sort of authorities on mushrooms is Stephen. He makes a product called Host Defense, is his company. And it's a good one. Oh, for goodness sakes. It's going to drive me crazy. So now I'm going to have to look him up. That's okay. It's just one of those little things that if I can't think of it, it's going to make me nuts until I figure it out. That's right. Good. I call it consulting the oracle. Excuse me for a moment while I consult the oracle. And then I can bring you this gentleman's name. Okay. Oh, and of course they want to tell me all about their product. I just want to know about the gentleman that created it. Anyhow, there are so many wonderful, wonderful. Paul Stamets, that's his name. Paul Stamets he's a West Coast guy. I think he might be from Washington, but he did TED Talks. He's sort of like the world authority on mushrooms. And so he's a lovely individual. And there's another company called JHS. So one of the things about mushrooms that I think is really important is that there are lots of companies trying to get your money. And if mushrooms are not processed appropriately, you're buying expensive poop. You won't get anything good from them. So the medicinal part of mushrooms are called beta-glucans. And beta-glucans are found in the water extract of the mushroom. So if you've got a company who are trying to sort of cheaply produce some capsules, what they do is they go and cultivate all those mushrooms, they dry them, they pulverize them into a powder, and they stick them in a capsule. That capsule will be swallowed, go in your stomach, and happily travel through your digestive tract until it comes out the other end. And you won't get anything from it. A good mushroom product has been cultivated at the right time of year, off of the right trees, in a nice, healthy environment, not filled with pesticides, because mushrooms are a natural filter for things. That's like the liver of the plant world. And so it's been cultivated at the right time of year from the right place, and then it's been turned into a giant mushroom soup. And it's been decocted or boiled for days and days and days. And then they dehydrate that soup, put that powder in a capsule, and that's what you take. Because now you're getting the hot water extract of the mushroom. And so I get a bit picky about where people buy mushrooms. It's one of the few things that I'm quite specific about brand. Whereas if you've ever come to see me, I'm not typically too fussed about where you get your melatonin, for example, because melatonin is melatonin is melatonin. It's a hormone. It is what it is, and it doesn't really matter who's making it. But mushrooms, it matters. So you can always look at the work of Paul Stamets as a resource for mushrooms. And Host Defense is a good company, and JHS is a good company. Any other questions? How are we even doing for time? I don't even know where we're at. Oh, look at that. It's like bang on.